Morning, everyone. My name is Amy Peck, and I manage Public and Stakeholder Engagement, which is a program of the Canadian Cattlemen's Association. Thanks so much for joining us tonight. We're going to be having a conversation about mental well-being in times of crisis. With devastating drought and wildfire conditions across many regions of Canada, we know that there are a lot of producers out there under extreme stress. In situations like these, it's not always easy to ask for help, or you may not know where to start. I hope through the conversation we have here tonight, you can take away practical tips and strategies to create resilience for yourself in the face of crisis. I am very pleased to introduce Cynthia Beck, who will be leading us in this discussion tonight. Cynthia is a master's student in the clinical psychology program at the University of Regina. She works in rural mental health and provides volunteer suicide intervention response services to Southeast Saskatchewan. Cynthia and her husband Wade, along with their 2 children, farm in partnership with Wade's family. The Becks operate a multi-generational mixed cattle and grain farm near Milestone, Saskatchewan, consisting of purebred Charolais and a commercial beef herd. Thank you for being here tonight, Cynthia. I will pass it over to you.
Thank you very much, Amy. Thank you very much to the Canadian Cattlemen's Association for asking me to do this presentation. Right now we're kind of at this point where agriculture producers are experiencing really, really high rates of chronic stress. So to me, it's incredibly important that not only agriculture producers are recognizing what we're going through right now, but it's also important that industry leaders, such as the Canadian Cattlemen's Association, also play a role in recognizing what producers are facing, but helping producers to kind of get through those tough times. So I do presentations a little bit differently than I think that a lot of people do presentations. I'm not going to tell you all about what you're going to hear, because as you can tell from the title, this is learning about mental well-being and getting through a time of crisis. I also don't share take-home messages. I'm a really stubborn individual, and I think that we all have the ability to think for ourselves. So I encourage you to listen along. Please ask questions. And if you have a question during the presentation, you can use your raise hand function on Zoom, and then Amy will open your microphone, or you can type a question in the chat, and Amy is going to help me stay on top of those questions. The reason that I want you to ask the question at the time that you have the question is 2 parts. So number 1, when we have a question and we're trying to listen while also remembering the question to ask for later on, our brain actually decides which is more important. And if it's remembering the question, we will not listen to the presentation fully. Or if our brain decides that, oh, it's more important that I listen to the presentation, you will forget your question. And chances are, if you have that question, other people have it as well. So please, 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 if you have a question, use the raise hand function on Zoom or type it in the chat, and Amy will point out that there's a question and I will answer it as we get going. As you can see, hopefully on your screen you're seeing this. I am a clinical psychology master's candidate. I also farm. I'm a parent. I'm a student. I work in rural mental health, and this is actually my office that I'm in right now. And I also do volunteer suicide intervention response services. Quite often, when people are engaging in conversation with me or just talking, I hear very often, I don't know how you do it. I don't know how you're doing all of this, or I don't know how you stay on top of all of this. But here's the thing, most of the people who say that to me are agriculture producers. So they too play numerous roles on their farm and wear multiple hats, just like I do. 1 second. There, hopefully your screen changed. So I would like to point out some of those right now. Chances are, if you are an agriculture producer, doesn't matter if you are a farmer, a rancher, if you play a main role on the farm or you play a secondary role on the farm and bring in off-farm income, you too wear multiple hats when you're on the farm. You could be a mechanic to fix your machinery, a veterinarian, an agronomist for planning your crop rotations or pest and weed control, a business manager to budget your years and plan in advance, nutritionist for optimal livestock herd health, genomics expert, and I probably don't need to tell you what they do when it comes to your herd and managing your herd, an accountant to balance the books and deal with all of those government regulations, a marketing and salesperson to sell their products, a therapist to maintain farm-family relationships, because I don't know, I haven't met a farm family that hasn't needed some help and support along the way in communicating. And then, of course, after all of that, you are also the laborer who does an incredible amount of work. So have you ever taken the time to recognize, number one, the amount of intelligence that you are required to have or use on a daily basis? Number two, did you recognize like how important you are on your operation? So you are a major asset to your operation, and so are the people who work with you. And that is really, really important. I think as agriculture producers, quite often we put the farm like number one. The farm work is just our top priority. And what happens is everything else kind of falls to the bottom, especially during a crisis situation. However, when we're experiencing a crisis and we are putting the work at the very top of the priority list and we kind of put our noses to the grind and we try to work through the problems, we do have the potential to become less of an asset to our farm operation. So here's an example. Here's a tractor. I don't know if you can see. I also don't know if you can see my cursor, but see how the tire is broken off here? So I don't know what happened. This is not our tractor, thank goodness. But obviously something happened and this tractor experienced a breakdown, which happens. Typically breakdowns occur more often than not if we haven't been able to stay on top of maintaining our machinery, right? So life gets busy and we just can't tend to everything that requires our attention. Okay, also there's fluke accidents that happen too, right? Well, this tractor is less of an asset. It's capable or less capable of doing its job, right? However, if we do that maintenance, fix that tire and the axle or whatever else it requires, throw some fuel in there, make sure the tires have air, do a service, that tractor comes back to being able to be in full use. It is serving its purpose on the farm, it's beneficial, and it is an asset. But what about this? I don't know if you can see what that is, but it's actually a combine that has burnt to the ground. This is also a friend of mine's combine. And this combine obviously is less of an asset or able to be less of an asset than the tractor. Now, at a previous presentation that I did, someone mentioned about having insurance. So this combine may be an asset if you have insurance. However, you still are required to do a pile of work or scrambling in order to replace this asset. Well, we are the exact same way. I'm going to say that we are very similar to the equipment or the machinery that we have. We have the ability to be a complete asset to our farm, where we have the ability to work and function, but there's times where we are not operating at our finest or at our greatest capacity. And typically that happens when we are experiencing times of crisis. And for a lot of people right now in agriculture, we are experiencing times of crisis. So I wanted to point out that our ability to be an asset is greatly, greatly impacted by a lack of sleep, dehydration, nutrition. So if you are the type of person that you wake up in the morning, you chug a cup of coffee, that's me, and you leave for the day. Well, if you work a really, really physical job, it is really difficult for your body to run on no water and no fuel. You also would never do that with your tractor for the day. If you were going fencing for the day or you were going haying for the day, you would make sure that you have all the supplies you need, and you would also make sure that your fuel is, or your tractor is topped up with fuel. Otherwise, you're going to be left stranded on the side of the road. And our bodies can do the exact same thing when we're not looking after them. Substance use also greatly affects our ability to be an asset. And for some people right now, substance use, whether that's drinking way more coffee, and I'm laughing because Amy and I were just talking about that, or using drugs, alcohol, tobacco, or even prescription medication in a way that it was not prescribed, that all has an impact on our ability to be an asset, because all of those things impact our health. Same thing with stress. And I'd like to point out the differences between chronic and acute stress. So chronic stress is what we're facing right now. If you were really concerned about a lack of water or a lack of grass, starting back in May, June, July, and here we are arriving at the end of August, perhaps you've had some fires go through, perhaps you've ran out of water, perhaps you've got a blue-green algae bloom in the only water supply that you've had, and perhaps you've ran out of pasture and you haven't been able to find any feed. That's chronic stress. You are maintaining that stress over a really long period of time. Acute stress is if you were in a car accident and your life was in danger, and then you kind of walk away from that accident, well, that's acute stress. So it has a very certain start point, is very short duration, and then it has an end point. Both of those affect our physical health differently, and I'll tell you a little bit more about that. Also, we have environmental exposures all the time as agricultural producers. So we are exposed to the elements like weather, right? We're also exposed to air quality difficulties. If you've ever swept out a grain bin or cleaned your barn, well, chances are you've been exposed to rodent excrement, right? There's also chemicals that we have to be around as producers. And then there's also the threats to our safety. So sometimes we experience threats to our safety, perhaps from our livestock, perhaps from our machinery, or perhaps from the people that we work with. So speaking from a physical health point of view, and when I'm talking about health, physical health and mental health, they really go hand in hand, and one affects the other. It's just like a circle. So when we're impacted and our physical health is impacted, we may lack the energy to get our job done for the day. We might have impaired physical strength, or you might find that you have less endurance. So on days where you were doing a full day of vaccinating, moving pastures, weaning calves, whatever that is for you, you might find that you are feeling just really exhausted or lacking the ability to not yell at the people who are helping you. We also experience an increase of injury to ourselves or others, and we also can experience increased rates of illness. So that's how all of those things, the lack of sleep, dehydration, and poor nutrition, can affect us physically. So mentally though, our mental ability to be an asset, when we are lacking sleep, and sleep, we really underrate sleep, which is unfortunate, because there's research out there that has identified links between sleep deprivation and increased rates of illness. For example, Alzheimer's, cancer, cardiac arrest, all of those things. So sleep is really important, and you're going to hear me say that again and again and again. A lack of sleep, dehydration, and poor nutrition also affects our ability to think clearly and make really good decisions. So decision making affects our farm business management practices all the time, and we may not even realize that. It can also impact our risk-taking behavior. So on days where you might never let somebody ride in the bucket of the tractor or in the back of the truck, and then one day you're in a rush and you didn't sleep and you haven't had a chance to eat, you may have poor judgment and say, yeah, hop in the back of the truck or hop in the bucket of the tractor, and then an accident happens. Also, it impacts how we communicate with others. So I don't know how many of you have been out sorting cows on a really hot, dusty day, and pretty soon there's swear words flying, sorting sticks are flying, and perhaps you're getting more aggressive with livestock. So that's a way that we communicate, right? And who's impacted? Well, the livestock, ourselves, and the people that we are trying to work with, who are trying to be there to support us. Those things also affect our ability to handle stress and to regulate emotion. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about that. So what are signs of decreasing mental health? Well, if you find yourself pushing a round bale uphill, you may be experiencing decreasing mental health. Here's a very concrete example, though, that I think a lot of people have heard about, which is bales, whether they're square bales, round bales, hay bales, straw bales, it doesn't matter. There's a really high occurrence right now of people stealing bales. And I think it's really easy for us to say, well, you know, that person is a bad person, or they're just a jackass, excuse my language, but it's pretty easy for us to chalk it up to their personality. But we might not actually be thinking, hey, that person is like under a lot of chronic stress, and it could be impacting their decision-making ability and increasing their risk-taking behavior. So it might actually have nothing to do with who they are as a person. It might have nothing to do with their personality. It might speak to their state of well-being, which would be classified as rather poor. So here are some warning signs. And a lot of people ask about this. How do I know if someone else is struggling? How do I know if I'm struggling? So here are just a few ideas that are kind of really the concrete ways of identifying if someone is having difficulties. So if you notice changes to routine, so this is whether it's for you or for someone else, if their sleep has changed, so perhaps they were a person who, only needed 5 hours of sleep and then they were up and at it for the day, suddenly they're sleeping 12, 13, 14 hours a day. There's something going on there. Also, if you see changes in hygiene, so if you had a neighbor who always was really clean shaven and always showered and wearing clean clothes, and suddenly you see them and they're scruffy and dirty, there may be something going on there for them. You also might notice changes in diet or substance use, and quite often we chalk a lot of this stuff up to social behavior. But even with social behavior, we typically have habits or routines that we follow. So if you have a friend who you get together for a beer with, and the next time you get together they bring a 40 and drink it, there may be something going on there for them. There also can be changes in a person's energy level. And I think a lot of us think, well, someone is struggling only if they don't have a lot of energy, but that may not necessarily be the case. There are some disorders where people can go from being really low energy to really, really high energy. And that is definitely an indicator. Or their emotions may just be off. So it might even seem like they're turned off, like they're really, really flat. Or maybe they are joking more than they normally would, that type of thing. Also, trouble concentrating, isolating, or people kind of withdraw and stop communicating, those are indicators. They may engage in risky behavior that they never would have. And sometimes I think these last 2 points are the ones that we typically notice from our neighbors or other producers, is when there are uncharacteristic judgment or decisions made, and it just seems really out of place for the person. So say, for example, you have a neighbor who typically uses the machinery they have. They don't go buy new machinery every year. And here we are in a poor crop year, and suddenly they go and buy 2 new combines. And you kind of go like, whoa, what is going on? They may have hit the panic button. So there might be something going on there for them. Or one night you're speaking with a neighbor and they kind of sound like they're doing good. They are trying to find solutions to feeding their herd. And the next morning you see a potload of cattle driving by and the neighbor has sold all of them. And it's really, really sudden. There may be something going on for that neighbor as well. Also, #1 indicator for agriculture producers is a visible change in their environment. So perhaps they were always somebody who really looked after their cow herd. And then the next time you see dead animals laying in the pasture or a pile of foot rot or what have you, where their animal's health is not being looked after, or you see deterioration around the farm. So if they were always somebody who really kept up their buildings, and suddenly, you know, kind of everything is falling apart. Sure, there's no disposable income right now, or very little. There may also be a lack of time, but you'll see kind of a drastic change where they kind of take a downward slide. So moving through the tough times, you know what, when we are going through anything that involves stress, it's really important to recognize that there are pieces, and I think of them as pieces to a puzzle on how to move through a stressful time or a crisis. The first thing that we need to do, though, in recognizing that, you know, how do I help myself get through a crisis, is to recognize or learn what our body's stress response is. So on the screen right now, you should be seeing kind of a chart that I adapted from Dr. Colvin, who actually studies behavior in the classroom. And so this is just a really rough drawing that I did that kind of goes through like where we trigger. So an example right now would be the drought is definitely a trigger for us, right? So it kind of starts our nervous system on a bit of a stress response. Then maybe you go out to the pasture and your dugout is dried up. Okay, so there is an agitation, right? Because now you're hauling water. Well, then the next time you go out, say you've had a fire go through half the pasture. Well, that's just definitely going to take you from escalation right up there to crisis. When we are in crisis mode, our body, our brain actually, and a really old system in our body called the fight, flight, or freeze system floods our body with hormones, neurotransmitters, basically a kind of adrenaline. And what happens is that response system is meant to keep us safe. And back in the old days when we were cave people, you know, if we were walking around the corner foraging for food and a saber-toothed tiger jumped out at us, that fight, flight, or freeze system would flood our body with 2 different types of adrenaline. It would dilate our pupils so we could see clearer. It would redirect blood flow from our intestines, like our digestive system, redirect that blood to our lungs and our limbs so that we could fight or run away for our life. So that system is actually designed for acute stress. Here's the kicker. I don't know when the last time any of us saw a saber-toothed tiger, right? We typically don't deal with a lot of acute stressors. We deal with chronic stress, and our body cannot tell the difference. So quite often, more often than not, when we were going through a crisis or a really stressful period for a long period of time, our nervous system naturally is elevated. So almost think of it as your tractor throttling on high all the time. instead of you gearing it down. So think of it as throttling on high, you turn it on, runs on high, and then you turn it off and you don't let it cool down. That's really, really difficult, right? And that's kind of what our bodies are going through right now. It's like we're down here, we're up here, we're down here, we're up here. Eventually, we do de-escalate. Typically, we come down. It's different for different people, but it's usually around the half hour, 45-minute mark that we do come down, and our nervous system will bring us down. And we go into the hangover recovery stage. So if you've been experiencing a lot of stress lately and you have something happen in the morning where it's super stressful, perhaps there's a blowout with family or with coworkers, your hired man does something that normally wouldn't tick you off, but this morning it really did. And then later on, you're just like feeling so exhausted. Perhaps you're craving something really high carbohydrates, high fat, high sweet, high salt. That's your body in the hangover recovery period. So why does that all matter? Well, this is based on cognitive behavior therapy, and it's where our thoughts, our emotions, our bodily sensations, and our behaviors, they all impact each other. So think of it as a really gentle breeze, and the difference between a really gentle breeze and a full-blown tornado, right? It's the energy that feeds it that creates that tornado. Well, our stress response, whether that's feeling anxious, which could be increased heart rate, sweating, an upset stomach, that type of stuff, we can actually think ourselves into a panic attack. We can think ourselves into an anxiety attack. So when we're doing the best that we can and we're coping and we're working hard, if you are a person who kind of only concentrates or focuses on the worst case scenario, then you naturally are going to trigger your nervous system. You naturally are going to have that increased emotions like anger, hopelessness, frustration. When you're feeling those things, it can trigger your bodily sensations, right? You might have a headache, you might have increased heart rate, you might have an upset stomach, you may not feel like eating. Well, then those things affect your behavior. So we might lash out, we might not sleep, we might drink more. For a lot of us, we, put our noses to the ground and we work harder and we try to work through it. Here's the thing though, when we focus on the worst case scenario, and yes, I do realize that some of us are living it, but when we focus on the worst case scenario, imagine staring at a mountain and moving the mountain closer and closer to your eyes, and you're trying to find a pathway to get up it. Well, when it's so close in your face, you can't see around it to try and find any solutions, right? And it's the same way when we are only focusing on the worst case scenario. And I say that with complete respect, recognizing that some of us are living it. So what do we do instead? Well, if we can shift our thoughts, shift our emotions, even shift bodily sensations or our behaviors, we can have long-term impacts on how we're coping to get through this. So I don't know how many of you have thought to yourself, I can't do this. We're going to fail. I'm going to lose the farm. This farm has been in my family for generations and I'm going to be the person who loses it. If any of those have crossed your mind, there's things that are being triggered from that. So chances are your emotions are going to ramp up or you're going to feel more hopeless. You will have worse anxiety. You may feel like you are having a heart attack, like you've got a headache all the time, or you can't sleep. And when we do that, our behaviors shift to crisis mode. So we might make decisions that we never would make, and we're really not thinking clearly. If we can shift one of those things, just one of those things, we will change all of them. So if you can shift your thinking, instead of thinking, I'm going to lose the farm, to thinking, okay, here's the fact of the situation. We are out of water. Okay, well, I can haul water from here. Or we are out of feed. Okay, I'm going to look on the internet for feed or something where you are pinpointing or picking out one problem at a time and trying to find possible solutions to that. There's also a really interesting study out there, and I'm going to share this. If you are having a really bad day where you cannot pull yourself out of the angry or the hopeless, I challenge you to walk around with a fake smile on your face, like a really big fake smile. Try to do that, to force yourself to do that for about 1.5 minutes, 2 minutes. And what researchers have identified is that between the behavior and the body sensation of a forced smile, it actually fools our brain into thinking that we are being happy, and it will change our thoughts and our emotions to kind of lift us out of that despair or anger. And you do actually feel better, and that's researched. Try it, because I have, and it works. It does work. Some days I don't want it to work, so I stop ahead of time, but I'm just being realistic. So what helps us? Well, make yourself a priority. Like I said before, you are the #1 piece of machinery on your farm. Your cows cannot feed themselves. They will die in the winter if you're not there. The haying cannot get done by itself. Crops don't seed themselves, and taxes don't pay themselves. I'm sorry to say it that way, but it's very true. So you are the #1 piece of equipment on your farm. Make yourself a priority. Practice self-care. And my definition of self-care is not what everybody else thinks. I'm not talking about taking trips or bubble baths. Who has time or finances for that? I am talking about staying hydrated. Drink a glass of water in the morning. Take a water bottle with you when you leave for the day. Fuel yourself the same way that you would, maintain your machinery. Eat breakfast in the morning. Take snacks with you. Please eat more than 1 meal a day. If you don't eat all day long and you come in and you eat this really big supper at midnight and then go to bed, if you are really grouchy the next day or you feel like crap, it was the midnight meal that did it to you, because you didn't fuel your body all day long, and then you got your fuel at a time when your body needed to rest instead of digesting. And sleep. Sleep is so important. I told you before about the physical health factors. The one thing that we teach adolescents, because let's face it, adolescents do not do a lot of sleeping, or most adolescents don't. The #1 way to spiral yourself into a mental disorder, whether that's anxiety, depression, or a psychotic episode, is to go without sleep for a few days. And I don't know, as an agriculture producer, are you sleep deprived? I can name multiple seasons where I am, like calving, bull sale, seeding, haying, harvest, throw in there being a parent, right? And bringing in an off-farm income. So yeah, there are lots of times where we are sleep deprived. That's why it's really, really important that if you are out, I don't care what you're doing, if you're out for the day fencing or you are haying, if you feel really tired, take 15 minutes and rest your body, have a nap. It's so important, so important. Also, like I said, move and rest your body. If you have been in machinery all day long, your circulation has not been functioning, and neither has your heart rate, and you've used very little muscles. So get out of the tractor, do a stretch, move your body. Even if you have to walk around the house 4 times, whatever, do something to give your body a bit of a break. It's also really important to disconnect from social media and the news. And if you are a person who experiences anxiety, worry, you have problems with sleeping, then you need to be disconnecting from your cell phone, radio, TV, iPads, whatever, at least an hour before bedtime, to allow your body to disconnect and kind of calm down, is really what I'm going to say. And there's research to back that, actually, regarding our own internal biological clock or circadian rhythm, the effects of screen time on that system within our brain. And this is my suggestion also. It's really important to identify an interest outside of farming. I think that a really major contributor to our angst, our worry, and our stress during times of crisis is, what if I lose the farm? And then who am I? And we lack that identity. We lack self-identity outside of our farm. And I know that a lot of people have a really hard time when I talk about this, because we've been taught for generations or centuries that we are the farm and the farm is us. In today's day and age, the farm is a business. It's your chosen profession. And at some point, I encourage you to learn who you are outside of farming, identify other interests, because at some point you will stop farming. And my dad always joked about, you know, the day that I stop farming is the day I die. And that's exactly what happened to him. And I'm not saying that's what's going to happen to everybody, please know that. But you, at some point, you may get to an age where you want to retire. You may get to a point in life where you are forced to retire from farming. And then what? Who are you? Explore that question before the time comes. Makes for a way easier transition. What helps us? So here's a little bit more that are kind of outside of the immediate self-care. Take note of what your triggers are and what your pattern of coping is. So if sorting cattle with your in-laws always leaves you raging and angry at the end of the day, okay, there's your trigger. If you know that going in, you can prepare yourself for that, and there will be a different outcome. Patterns of coping. A lot of times when we are experiencing high rates of stress, we take that stress out on the family, friends, hired hands around us. That is a pattern of coping. And I'm going to use a swear word, but the term that I have coined it is shit flinging. We fling our anger on the people around us, which is very similar to silverback gorillas. When they're really upset at their troop or they're frustrated, angry, they throw their fecal matter on the rest of the troop around them. So the next time you hear yourself yelling, I want you to think of a silverback gorilla shit flinging and stop yelling. If you can, stop it, because we impact those around us far greater than we ever can imagine. Also be mindful of whose stuff you're carrying. And that also goes along with the toxic comparison. So if you have a neighbor who you think to yourself, like, okay, we run the same amount of acres, we've got the same amount of cattle, but they own this new piece of machinery, and how do they afford that baler, and where did they haul in their feed from, and how did they afford to go camping this year of all years? That's really toxic comparison, because you're not comparing yourself for learning benefit, like how to learn how to do something better or improve things on your own farm. It's kind of toxic because you're comparing yourself and the only outcome is negative, right? The same thing goes with whose stuff you're carrying. So a lot of times we take on other people's attitudes or stress, even if we're hearing them, you know, talk about stuff right now. So for a lot of people working in the agriculture industry, when they are listening to producers talk, and we're going through a really tough time now, some of those people in the ag industry who may not actually be farmers themselves, they end up taking on some of our stuff that we're carrying, and it's making them unwell also. So we can do that too as producers. Stick to the facts. This is so incredibly important. Quite often we are really good at lying to ourselves. We tell ourselves little fibs all day long. If you've ever muttered the phrase, I can't do this, I can't take this anymore, I'm a failure, I'm a terrible farmer, I'm going to lose the farm, I'm not smart enough. Those are all lies. We are lying to ourselves. Also, when we're jumping to the worst case scenario of I'm going to lose my farm, that's all you're seeing. And that's not a fact. It might become one, but it probably is not an imminent fact. And you have many other steps to go through and solutions and strategies to use before you get to that point. So stick to the facts, because it helps you regulate your emotions, or even lift you out of the emotion that is really kind of hindering to us. Also, remember who your supports are and be proactive with that. So if you have a neighbor or a buddy that you text with, a family member, whatever, remember that those people are your supports. So quite often it's easiest for us to take out our frustration or our anger or our hopelessness on the safe people. But we're not helping ourselves, and we're not helping them with that. So be proactive. If you recognize that you are struggling and that you would benefit from some additional support, get out there and contact that additional support. You would never leave it up to a magic wand, which I hate that term, but you would never leave it up to thin air as to who was going to feed your cattle. Yet we do that all the time with our health and our mental health. We put off going to a doctor. We only go to the dentist when, you know, we're in brutal pain. And it's not very often that we seek help for our health, whether it be physical or mental. So be proactive and stay on top of that stuff. And last of all, when you feel like quitting, remember why you started. You got into farming for a reason. It takes an incredible amount of knowledge for you to have come as far as you've come. So please keep that in mind. Sometimes we do need a reminder as to why we started, because that kind of helps us bring things back into perspective. There are resources for producers out there. The online therapy unit at the University of Regina has courses. Many of the courses are available only to Saskatchewan producers, but I know that there's other people on the call here. And they do have some classes or courses that are available to anybody across Canada. Saskatchewan Polytechnic, once again, this is for Saskatchewan producers, but we have a research study going where we're trying to hear feedback from producers as to what you are looking for in terms of mental health supports. Research has identified that even talking to someone and having your voice heard helps you to kind of alleviate the load, the stress load. Of course, there's a farm stress line, and there are local numbers in provinces across the country. There's also a website that you can see there, farmstressline.ca. Also, 211 is up and running in every province and every territory in Canada, and it's different depending on your province. So you can dial 211, or you can go on the website, and what it does is find you services in your area. So it might be mental health services, occupational therapy, physical therapy, massage therapist. It's quite a really good resource, and it's in your area. There's also the Canadian Mental Health Association, which has really great supports. Not listed on there is the Kids Help Phone, which a lot of people kind of smile when I say that one, but anyone, even adults, can phone into the Kids Help Phone. And we also have each other. And I think that social media has become a really good aspect for reaching out for support or being proactive and offering others support. But it's okay to send a text and say, hey, I'm thinking of you. Hey, how are you holding up? That's a really effective tool in helping each other strategize as to how to move forward and get through these times. This is the course that I was talking about through the online therapy unit for Saskatchewan agriculture producers. This is also my thesis research. So I worked with the online therapy unit to tailor an internet delivered cognitive behavior therapy course. And we've tailored it to agriculture producers. So identifying how the strategies that are taught in the course can relate to everyday farm life. And that's everything for my presentation. So I encourage you to reach out, ask any questions, because I'm here for a while.
Excellent. Thanks so much, Cynthia. As Cynthia said, we do have a couple minutes, so if there are questions and you want to submit them, either via the Q&A button or the chat button at the bottom of the screen. You can feel free to do that now. I can't wait the next time that I feel myself yelling, Cynthia, to imagine a silverback gorilla. So that is very good for me to know that.
It is effective. It is effective. Even having that image is a really great way for us to kind of have that immediate, like, okay, I'm gonna like get my stuff straightened out here, and bring myself down a notch. Yeah.
Yeah. And to be able to maybe even laugh about it. You know, why am I getting so upset? This is what I look like in my head. So I love that.
And we've, in our family, we've made it safe for, like, whether it's our kids or my husband or myself to my husband, we've made it safe for everybody to kind of point out that behavior to each other. So like, there are days where we will be like, hun, you're shiftlinging right now. And the kids can say that to us too. We've made it a safe environment to have that. So yeah, it makes a difference, because you can't help but smile. Like, yeah.
Yeah, just snap you right out of that. Love it. All right, well, I don't see any questions coming in, so we can close it here. Just want to let everyone know the presentation has been recorded and it will be available on the CCA YouTube channel as of tomorrow morning. So you can watch it again or share it with friends and family who maybe missed out on being live with us tonight. Just wanted to say thanks so much to everyone for joining us, and a big thank you to Cynthia Beck for leading us through this conversation and providing us with some further resources that we can go to for support if needed. So just very much appreciated, Cynthia.
Thank you, Amy. Thanks for having me.